You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
All you need is a few minutes to start your day off with something historic when you listen to the This Day in History podcast. Every day there's a new episode for you to listen and learn about what happened that day way back when. So listen and subscribe to This Day in History wherever you get your podcasts. That's This Day in History wherever you get your podcasts.
Have you ever wondered how inbred the Habsburgs really were? What women in the past used for birth control? Or what Queen Victoria's 9 children got up to? On the History Tea Time podcast, I profile remarkable queens and LGBTQ+ royals, explore royal family trees, and delve into women's medical history and other fascinating topics. Join me every Tuesday for History Tea Time, wherever fine podcasts are enjoyed.
Hello, delicious friends, and welcome to Who Did What Now, the history podcast that's not your history class, with me, your host, Katie Charlwood, history harlot and reader of books. Yes, my voice is still gone quite a bit. It hasn't quite returned back after seeing Esme last week. So we went for dinner after the book launch and we did a little in-conversation with myself and Esme and Dr. Susan James, and we had a really good chat. It was really fun. It was wonderful for everybody who showed up and to everyone who did show up, and photos and hugs and everything. You're amazing. And shout out to my friend Mark who buckled my shoes for me. For those of you who don't know, I've got scoliosis and my back spasms quite a lot. So I have trouble sometimes like bending and doing certain movements, but Mark sorted my shoes for me so that I could match Esme's book. So I had a little blue outfit with pink shoes that matched the colour of her international book cover. But yeah, that was that. So we were out and we were having dinner, and then it got really loud and I basically talked too much. As Dr. Susan James said, I'm the only person she's met that can talk more than Esme, which I feel is a sense of achievement, actually. But yeah, I talked myself hoarse, but I'm finally like up to par where a point I can physically record again instead of making some weird husky noises, which I'm sure some of you would be into, but I feel is not entirely conducive to a history podcast. But I'm really excited because my analytics started working again, and I charted in Peru. Who is listening to me in Peru? Paddington Bear? Like, what is this? In Panama? Like, I'm getting all the P's. This is fabulous. I love that people are listening to me. This is amazing. But anyone who still hasn't rated and reviewed 5 stars, you could totally still do that and boost me up the charts and make me so happy. Because listen to my voice. It's so sad. Oh. But yeah, I've got a few things I want to touch on before we get into the harrowing story of today. So I am back on tour. Things are going. So I am in the Comedy Cavern in Cork on the 14th of September. I've got that going on. There's still tickets available. If you want to come see me, get your tickets, because I'm talking about some funky ladies. I'm very excited about this one. When I discovered this, let me tell you, I was like, I've been waiting to find something like Cork-based that was juicy, and I finally have it. You have no idea how happy I am to have something like this. Like, no idea. So we have that. Now, I have extended the early bird sale for the Belfast tickets. Now, the reason I did that is because I accidentally shut off all ticket sales on the 31st of August. So they have been unavailable to purchase for like several days. And I felt that's a bit shitty, and so I thought, you know what, I'm just going to sort this out and get yous an extra week. So as of day of recording or day of release, so Tuesday, by Friday this week, they're still going to have some tickets there. So payday, get your tickets. Early bird catches the discount. I know a few of the Edinburgh and Newcastle tickets were snatched up this week. There seems to be a greater rush in those. So if you're planning to get those, probably want to get a wee bit quicker now because they are starting to go. This week especially. I don't know why. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, got your jibber jabber. In fact, I will. But first, we've got to get our source on. Our sources are A Woman to Blame, The Kerry Babies Case by Neil McCafferty, Truth, Power and Lies, Irish Society and the Case of the Kerry Babies by Tom Inglis, Lost Innocence, The Inside Story of the Kerry Babies Mystery by Barry O'Halloran, Kerry Babies, An Unsolved Murder 34 years after Ireland put womanhood on trial by Sinead O'Carroll, Leis go gafa le Joanne Hayes agus a muntre faoi chas le na chéirí, Tuairisc, The Changing Face of Catholic Ireland, Conservatism and Liberalism in the Anne Lovett and Kerry Babies Scandals by Moira J. Maguire, The Report into the Tribunal of Inquiry into the Kerry Babies Case of October 1985. And finally, My Story by Joanne Hayes. Are you sitting comfortably? Good. Then let's begin. Now, before we delve any deeper and before I get into any of this, if you've read the title, the description, and you've heard all these sources, you know you're going to be in for a tough ride. This is not going to be an easy episode for anyone to listen to. Content warning. This is going to discuss infanticide, and it's going to have descriptions of violence and abuse and cadavers. Now, if this is something that upsets you or is going to trigger you, this is the time to just stop listening. Just stop listening. You can scroll it all the way down to mute and let the rest play if you like, if you really feel the need for that engagement, or you can just turn this off. I won't be offended. I understand if this is not an episode that a lot of people can listen to, but like the Magdalene Laundries, this is a topic which I think has to be shared, especially considering I've lived in Ireland since I was 8 years old. This is my home, this is my life, and not acknowledging that this was the Republic of Shame, for so many years, it would be disingenuous, and it would be pretty shitty of me generally because of how much I call out other countries for their past, and to not do it to my own is bloody ridiculous. And the uncomfortable truth is just that. It's uncomfortable, it's unsettling, and I really don't want people to be distraught or have their mental health affected by this episode. And so get out now. Exit stage left. Get out of here, because now I'm going to tell you all about the Kerry Babies scandal. So I have been humming and hawing about how to start talking about this specific point in history. How do I broach this topic? And I was struggling. How do you intro this? And I thought, I'll listen to the beginnings of a few other podcasts. I'll see if I can get at least some kind of inspiration as to where to start. And so many of them started with things like, in lands unscathed by urban obsession, the rugged countryside of the wild Atlantic way, scenic coastal Kerry, an area of outdoor pursuits and traditional living. It was like setting up a fairy tale or a travel show. It was such a weird way to intro it, and I heard so many. Now, I don't know if it was supposed to be like a juxtaposition, like the sort of softness and the idyllic concept of the area and the land and the society compared to how everyone was treated, or not everyone, how women were treated in this scenario, or if they were just trying to ease people in gently. And I decided I'm not going to ease anyone in gently, because there's no easy way to talk about dead babies. And so that is where our story starts. On the 14th of April 1984, Jack Griffin, a local farmer in Cahersiveen in County Kerry, had gone for his evening run. Because shockingly enough, farmers are allowed to have hobbies. So this is part of his typical routine. He goes for his evening run. It's about 8 o'clock at night. He's going for a leg across the White Strand. And as he's running, he sees something on the rocks. He's not quite sure what it is. And as he gets closer, his heart starts to race. And as he gets there, he sees something. It's sort of pink. It has dark hair. And he's thinking to himself, please be a doll. And he's scared because he doesn't want to admit what it is. And so instead of approaching what he thinks is a doll, he turns on his heels and runs back to find someone else. And he finds his 18-year-old nephew, Brendan O'Shea. Now, Brendan is actually his wife's nephew, but semantics. Jack leads Brendan back across the strand over to the rocks and blesses himself as his nephew investigates. This 18-year-old boy goes over to the bundle on the rocks and flips it over and discovers that it is not, in fact, a doll, but is the body of a newborn baby. A newborn that had clearly not died of natural causes. So the boys head straight up to the barracks, they get the guards and they bring them down to the shore. It is April in Ireland, so it is dark at this point. So they come back with torches and flashlights and they make their way back to where they had discovered the infant. And so the guards are there with the local undertaker, Tom Courtney, and a priest. Now, if you're not entirely familiar with how Catholic Ireland was, the priest was there to baptise the baby. Now, you might be thinking it is quite peculiar to baptise a corpse. You're not wrong, but again, this is very, very Catholic Ireland. And so the priest was there to ensure that the soul of the infant got to heaven, because unbaptized babies, when they go to purgatory, it's the same sort of level of, I want to call it a level of hell, but it's the same area where people who end their own lives go. And it's not a nice place to be. And so in their eyes, they were doing this to ensure that this child had peace in the afterlife, if not its actual life. So the undertaker, Tom Courtney, he, names the baby John because it's a baby boy. And he pays for the baby's funeral and also for its memorial. So John has this memorial. It's like a mock marble. It's made of plastic. It's this little cross. And it has an inscription which has changed over the years. Now, originally the epitaph said, "I am the Kerry baby, baptised on 14th of the 4th, 1984, named John. I forgive." Which is a wee bit harrowing, and there's many ways in which that can be taken, most of them not good, and a lot of them accusatory. Now, the grave itself gets vandalised over the years as a political statement. And every time it's vandalised, Tom Courtney has paid for it to be fixed. Every single time. So clearly this affected him. I mean, it would, once you hear about this, how could it not? And eventually the epitaph is changed to, "In loving memory of me, the Kerry baby." Which is what it is. But Tom Courtney had covered this. So between the baptism and the internment of baby John, a pathologist takes a look at the baby. Now, this is not a time in Ireland, it's the 80s, that therapy or talking about your feelings in any way was promoted. You were supposed to, it's Catholic guilt. So what you do is you take all of your feelings and you stuff them down really, really hard. And then you do 3 Hail Marys and an Our Father and hope for the best. Like you don't share feelings. You don't have trauma. You don't have PTSD. Like you suffering brings you closer to Jesus. Like that's the whole shebang. So what these people saw that day, I'm sure stayed with them for the rest of their lives. Because on that beach in Cahersiveen, this body was massacred. Although it was quite clear what cause of death was, the pathologist performed an autopsy on baby John. If you're not good with violence and grievous bodily harm, I'm going to suggest you skip for the next about 90 seconds. So upon autopsy, the pathologist discovered that the newborn infant had 27 stab wounds. 27. 3 of which were to the chest and heart. The newborn also had severe injuries to the head, neck, and had a fractured spine. Now this is overkill by anybody's standard, but 27 stab wounds on a newborn, on someone so small, that is either an act of rage or desperation. According to the pathologist, baby John had survived approximately 48 hours before his life was ended. And it was believed that baby John had passed away between 3 and 5 days before his body was discovered. 2 days old, 27 stab wounds and other violent injuries. Like that is either someone destroying a life in pure, unadulterated rage or in sheer desperation. And again, I'm not condoning infanticide. I'm not trying to justify it. But I can't help but to think of postnatal depression. Like my brain just jumps there. Now I suffered from postpartum myself with all my kids, which is one of the reasons why I'm never having any more. But I had the kind that made me want to run into traffic and jump off of a bridge, not throw my child off a bridge, luckily. But I don't need to put me or my kids through that again, which is why I'm not crossing that bridge again. I am burning that bridge when I come to it, or if I come to it. Geez, I do everything in my power to make sure I can't come to it. Also, did you know that tubal ligation in Ireland is only €1,500? Like, I've half a mind to just tip my PayPal, guys. Let's get this done for me, because let's not cause any more stress in the world. But there is an actual baby blues things that affects everybody, every person who's ever given birth. It happens because of a hormone drop that happens on day 3. So day 3, the hormones drop and it just causes extreme emotional turmoil. You get upset at the drop of a hat. It really it enlarges the emotions. And my thought process, if it was this kind of scenario, I can understand the factors that led to it. Again, not justifying or condoning or accepting, but I can see why that would happen. Especially when you see how how unwed mothers were treated in this society and how heavy the cage of shame was upon them. You can understand. You see, when it comes to baby John, the Gardaí believe that whoever inflicted that violence upon him was baby John's mother. Their automatic assumption was this had to be an evil woman who caused such harm upon a baby, because she already had a child out of wedlock, so clearly she had no morals or ethics. That's their point of view, which we're going to discuss at the end of this episode, because I have a plot twist. So because it had been agreed that baby John had been alive for 48 hours, because he'd been alive because it was agreed upon that baby John was alive for 2 days, this was now treated as a murder inquiry. It was a murder investigation. And the local Gardaí, they hadn't dealt with something like this. They hadn't dealt with violent baby murder Unsurprisingly, when a story like this hits the news, it just blows up. And there's this small police force that doesn't really know how to handle this, so naturally the big guns are called in. And so they bring in, and I shit you not, the murder squad from Dublin. 6 members of the murder squad. They've got to keep a few people back in Dublin to deal with, the Dublin murders. And who is heading the 6-man murder squad but Kerry man himself, Superintendent John Courtney. He brings with him 2 specialist interrogators, Detective Sergeant Jerry O'Carroll and Detective Garda PJ Brown. And then 3 other fellows who I'm sure were very important, but I did not find their names. Now, the first thing they did was contact Cura. What's Cura? Well, I'm glad you asked, because I will tell you. Cura was an organisation which was set up in 1983 during this anti-abortion campaign that was going throughout the country. So it was a Catholic organisation which was set up to help unwed mothers. And by help, that probably means sending them to the Magdalene laundries or the mother and baby homes, which we will be discussing at a later date. If you haven't listened to the Magdalene laundries episode, it will give you a lot of context for what's going on here. Context, I'm going to have to give you context here. So the Irish Constitution, Bunreacht na hÉireann, the way the country is governed is in the Irish Constitution. In order to amend or repeal anything in the Constitution, there has to be a referendum. So the country has to have a public vote in order to change the Irish Constitution. Like, that's just the rules. Because it's a democracy, so the people have to have their say. That's just how it works. Like, you might not like the answer, or you might love the answer. It doesn't matter. It's democracy. That's how fucking democracy works, right? So there's a referendum. The 8th Amendment is written into the Constitution. Less than half registered voters, or half the voters of the country, voted in the referendum. Less than half. So although this is a country drenched in Catholic dogma and, the shame and guilt which is just ingrained with that, there's no clear way to say that everybody actually agreed, because so many people didn't vote. But yeah, so the Constitution is changed. It's effectively the right of the unborn has the same rights as the person with the womb, right? Both equal, which, now since the 60s, it was effectively illegal to have an abortion. There were extenuating circumstances and things like that. There was sort of a bit of wiggle room, not much, but there was a wee bit, but it was still a shameful thing to do. So a lot of the time, people would travel to England to have abortions. If you've seen Dairy Girls, they make a joke about that, Aunt Kathy went to England to have an abortion, didn't have the abortion, and there's the wee English fella. That's a running gag, because it was so common for pregnant girls to just go to the UK to have their abortion and then come back home. It was one of those known secrets, and it was just something that you kind of did. Oh, so-and-so's sick and they've gone away for a little while. That being said, I would like to state that in 2018, it was repealed. We repealed the 8th. It was a massive, massive turnout, and, lives are slowly but surely being saved now because of it. So Courtney and his murder squad, they go to Cura, and Cura send this letter to the Kerry County newspaper, basically, telling any women that have needed help with Cura, please call us, we need your help. The whole point was to get their details and pass the details on to the murder squad. And in a move that surprised absolutely fucking no one, not one person responded. Because I think if anybody had actually, gone through Cura, they did not want to be going near them again, because they did not treat people well. Not at all. So after their Cura caper fails masterfully, they then move on to the Bon Secours Hospital. Yes, that's right, the very same Bon Secours orders who were in charge of many, many mother and baby homes, which, yes, we'll be discussing next year because there's only so much trauma I can handle in one sitting. The nuns were asked for a list of women within a certain time period who had gone from being pregnant to not being pregnant, but then did not have a newborn to show for the no longer being pregnant. This was also a fruitless endeavour. Now, after Bon Secours, they then moved on to St. Catherine's Hospital. And what do you know? Third time's the charm. The murder squad received the names of 3 unwed women who had recently been on the maternity ward in St. Catherine's. 2 of the women were quickly ruled out because 1, they had alibis, and 2, they had fresh humans with them. They had their babies, right? The final woman on their list, the 25-year-old Joanne Hayes, had been in St. Catherine's maternity ward on the 14th of April, 1984. The same day that baby John, the Kerry baby, was discovered. Now, it was earlier on in the day. She was in earlier, mid-morning by the time she'd gotten there. Joanna had gone to the hospital because she was bleeding quite badly, and upon inspection, it was clear that she had recently given birth. And the quote that they give, this statement is, her uterus had been recently emptied. They don't say give birth, they don't say anything else, but uterus was emptied. What the actual fuck, guys? I understand clinical terms, but that is not that. But here's the thing, the gynecologist that was inspecting her, he was like, you had a baby. And she's like, I didn't have a baby. And he's like, no, but you did though, because you wouldn't be bleeding like this if you didn't. Now, this was common at the time. It was very typical. So women who had given birth outside of wedlock, especially if they'd had a stillbirth or a miscarriage, they would go into the hospital, they would be seen, they would be asked a few questions, and they would eventually break and provide the information, and then it would be dealt with, and it would be kept hush-hush. The guards wouldn't be informed. They wouldn't tell, the police force, because you just wouldn't, and it was just kept down because there was no need to promote that information. Except this time, the Garda Síochána were involved. They were very involved, and so this information was passed on. Except the very gynecologist, who was, by the way, massive pro-lifer, very anti-choice, he said to the Gardaí that he didn't think that this was the same person. He didn't think that she was the person who was the parent of baby John. He said, it's a different baby, it's a different situation. But the Gardaí, they didn't want to listen. But the Gardaí, they had their minds made up. Now, is it because, there was public pressure on finding a result to this case? Was it prejudice that had been existing in a patriarchal system, which was then emphasised via the Catholic doctrine, which had seeped into every factor of the society? Whom's to say? But they are now gunning for Joanne Hayes. Regardless whether or not the trained medical professional, in his official medical opinion, who had dealt with this thing day in and day out for however many years, stated to them that Joanne Hayes was certainly not the mother of the baby found on the White Strand in Cahersiveen, County Kerry. Before we get into the absolute shit show that is happening next, I think it's best that we take a little break right now to get a word from our sponsors.
Do you find it hard to sleep at night? Then the Calm Cove podcast can help you sleep deeply all night long. Calm Cove has deeply relaxing meditation music and ambient sounds like ocean waves and crackling fires. All of our episodes are designed to help you relax and to fall asleep fast. Calm Cove is brought to you by the team behind Sleep Cove, the sleep podcast that consists of spoken word hypnosis, meditation, and stories. So if you want to listen to a beautiful soundscape tonight, search for Calm Cove on Apple Podcasts or Spotify and see how we're helping millions of people relax and go to sleep every night.
If you enjoy bizarre true stories, then the Useless Information Podcast is the podcast for you. For example, did you know that author Robert Louis Stevenson gave his birthday away? Or that there was a football team that played for 6 years before someone realized that the school never ever existed? Or that a dog in upstate New York was once placed on trial for murder? Well, to hear these and hundreds of additional fascinating true stories from the Flipside history, be sure to check out the Useless Information Podcast. That's the Useless Information Podcast, podcasting worldwide since 2008 and available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening right now. Be sure to check it out.
And we are back, delicious friends, so let's just jump right back into it, yeah? Joanne Hayes, 25 years old, from a wee village in Kerry called Donegal. She lives in, I think, effectively like a typical Irish cottage, like very, very typical. There's no running water, there's no like heating system. I'm assuming that this is the type of house that would be heated by fireplaces. So you'd have a fireplace in every room and it would be fueled by either coal, logs or turf. Now turf is, if you don't know, it's also known as peat. It is like an oily dirt that you burn, but it gets hard and it has all of this like oils in it that just provide heat. Now I don't know who decided to like cut a chunk of dirt and then set it on fire, but it's a good idea. It smells amazing, by the way. It's very nice. So she lives in this multi-generational house, which again, very typical of the time. Like you didn't grow up and then kick your parents out. It's not a thing, right? So she lives there with like parents and her brothers and her sister. She's got brothers Ned and Michael and a sister Kathleen and an auntie Brady who also lived on the farm. Now she did have another aunt who was a nun called Sister Aquinas, which is just amazing. But obviously she's a nun, so she's not there. Now, Joanne is the only member of the household that has like an outside job. She works in a sports centre. Now, obviously some members of the family would work on the farm, but she has like an outside paying job. She's bringing more money into the household. So here's a horrible little fact for you. Like 10 years before this, like less, 9 I think, less than 10% of married women in Ireland had a job. And then women who were not married, like all of their jobs, all of their labour was sort of low, unskilled, low paid. Basically, the system existed to keep the boot on the neck, to ensure that women didn't have financial security or independence or, economic options. And this is also a period of time where divorce was also illegal. Like, divorce was illegal in Ireland until, was it 1996? So even if a woman wanted any kind of freedom, she couldn't get divorced and she couldn't get a decent job. She couldn't get anything well paying enough to support herself. Like, that's the crux of it, innit? And a lot of this was put in place by De Valera, Eamon De Valera, the absolute prick. Like, I'm not a fan of De Valera. I will always talk about how hilarious his prison break was because it is objectively funny. But, quick sidebar, there are 2 articles in the Irish Constitution, 41.2.1 and 41.2.2. So the first one recognises the role of women in the home, like the importance of a homemaker, of a mother, yada, yada, yada. And the second states that mothers shall not be obliged by economic necessity to engage in labour to the neglect of their duties in the home. Well, give us better part-time work and pay us more, bitches. Fuck you. Sorry, but not sorry. But that's the thing. Eamon De Valera was the bloody reason for this. Now, I do not believe for 1 second that Eamon De Valera arranged the ambush that murdered Michael Collins. The movie took a lot of liberties. Stop getting your historical information from cinema. But I do believe he was a misogynist asshole. Looking forward to that 1-star review I'm going to get from some uber nationalist who's like, she was mean about Eamon de Valera. Well, if Eamon de Valera wasn't so much of a prick, I wouldn't have anything to say about him, would I? Now back to Joanne. When she's working in the sports centre, she meets a man who sounds like he was involved in the 1798 Wexford Rebellion. Jeremiah Locke. Like, that is not a 1980s name. Like, that is a 1780s name. I don't care who you are. That's an old name. Jeremiah and Joanne are very flirty at work. They're messing about with each other, they're joking, they're play fighting, they're flirting, and they are in no way keeping the relationship a secret. Like, everybody in the sports centre, everybody knows that they're boinking, right? Which is bad enough, because this is not good for her reputation, because, throughout history, the easiest thing to gain and the hardest thing to lose as a woman is a reputation. Because of course it is. Now you might be thinking, sure, they're just seeing each other, what's the harm? Well, 1, this is 1980s Ireland, and 2, Jeremiah is married. Not only is Jeremiah Locke married in a country where divorce is not a legal option, not in any capacity, like, till death do you part, that is the situation. Now, not only is he existing in this space, but when he starts seeing Joanne, he has only been married 6 months. Joanne was absolutely besotted with Jeremiah. She loved him, she adored him, and she was really hoping that he was going to leave his wife for her. And they were so open about seeing each other that basically everybody in the village knew. Well, everyone apart from Joanne's family. Everybody knew what was going on. The local Garda knew that they were seeing each other. He knew, right? But again, no member of Joanne's family knew of this illicit affair until the 8-month pregnant Mary Locke showed up on their doorstep with her sister and mother-in-law in tow. And they show up, tell the entire family about what's been going on, and demands that the affair stops. Now, this causes a whole commotion, and so Joanne and Jeremiah do not go to their respective homes that evening. Instead, they go stay with a friend up in Tralee. But the following day, he goes back home to his wife, and Joanne, she goes back home to her family. Absolutely heartbroken, she goes back home and tells them that she's absolutely done with Jeremiah, she's going to move on with her life, and also, by the way, she's pregnant. Then on the 25th of June, 1982, Mary Locke gives birth to a healthy baby boy. 5 days later, Joanne suffers a miscarriage. And so Joanne has to go back to work because, she needs a job. She can't lose this job. And she goes back to work in the sports centre. And after suffering a miscarriage, has to openly congratulate Jeremiah on the birth of his son, which is just utterly heartbreaking. And things seem to have settled down for a couple of months. And I do mean a couple of months because 2 months later, Jeremiah and Joanne are seeing each other again. And it's not long before Joanne is pregnant again. And then on the 19th of May, 1983, Joanne gives birth to a baby daughter, Yvonne. And instead of being sent to the laundries or the mother and baby home or just to fend for herself, her entire family, love this baby. They are all over Yvonne, she is their little cherub. And they just don't mention, her origin. They're just she's here. How did it happen? I don't know, but we love this baby. She has this love and support from her family that so many people didn't. And of course, Joanne is still thinking that he loves her and that he's going to be with her. And honestly, she must be barely healed before they are shagging again, because 3 months after Yvonne is born, she is pregnant again. Because Jeremiah apparently just can't put a lid on it. Not even a wee bit, right? Because, and this is so much worse, not only is Joanne pregnant, but so is Mary Locke. He is consistently just fucking these two women over. And here's the thing, Jeremiah could have access to condoms. He could very easily, well not easily, but he could have access to condoms because married couples were allowed condoms. Like again, this is a period of time where only 2 out of every 12 pharmacies would or / could sell prophylactics, right? And it was only again to married couples. Like at one point this doctor had like tried to order some in and they got held back at customs because they were like, no. But yeah, like married couples could get condoms. So Jeremiah could do that. He chose not to do that and put both of these women's lives at risk because he's such a fucking arsehole. Don't be a fool, wrap your tool there, Jeremiah. And he's like, fuck that for Game of Soldiers. I'm going to do what I want. And it's such a vicious cycle. It's like you can't use protection, you can't use contraception, you cannot have an abortion if something happens, you cannot get divorced, you cannot support yourself. Like everything exists to just constantly put women in this pinball machine of shame. They're just heading off the sides and the numbers of sins just keep growing. Like, fuck this. And because the way this is just an integral part of the way society was, the way that someone like Joanne was automatically portrayed as this siren, this temptress who lured this man away with her feminine wiles, like, get a grip. So here is something I forgot to mention before, which is really bloody relevant actually. When Superintendent Courtney is talking to like the Tralee Gardaí, he tells them that baby John, the Kerry baby, was stabbed in the back, right? For the record, baby John, the Kerry baby, was not stabbed in the back at all. He was stabbed in the front all the time. No backstabbing, right? At all. But that is the information he passes on to the Tralee police. So the Garda Síochána, they go to 2 separate locations. They go to the Hayes residence, round up Joanne's family, while a bunch of detectives go to the sports centre where Joanne is working and collect her from there for questioning. So they bring them up to the station, they put them all in separate rooms, and they start interrogating Joanne. Like, so far they have no reason to suspect Joanne because, again, the gynecologist said that he genuinely didn't think she was it. And also, the local Garda from Ardebonny not only knew Joanne, but knew she was pregnant and knew that Jeremiah was the father of the baby. Like, this was not a secret. Like, she wasn't hiding anything. So, like, none of it made sense. But anyway, they interrogate her anyway. And, like, she tells them she gave birth, the baby was stillborn, and she buried it. End of discussion. Like, that's it. And they tell her they need, like, more details regarding it, and so she does. She tells them that on the 12th of April, like, it's night time, she goes into labour and she panics, and so she leaves the house, goes into a field on her brother's farm and gives birth alone. The baby is stillborn, it's like 6 or 7 months old, and she panics. She tears the umbilical cord with her bare hands and then leaves the baby on some hay. And then she goes to bed. She gets up the next day, she puts the baby in a paper bag and then a carrier bag from the chemist and then buries it in a pond on the farm. And the next day, Joanne was still bleeding, so she went to St. Catherine's Hospital and she stayed there for like 6 days and then went home. Now, the Gardaí weren't happy with this because this didn't fit their storyline. This wasn't what they wanted to hear. And so they kept her there and they badgered her. And they harassed her, and they harassed her family, and they beat her brothers until they all started confessing. And on top of all the physical abuse, like, they are threatening this young woman and her entire family. They're threatening to put her daughter in an orphanage, and they're going to sell the farm, they're going to leave them destitute, like all this horrible stuff. And it gets to the point that she ends up just agreeing, she ends up signing the confession, which is nothing like what she said in the beginning. So she says that, you know, she killed the baby in the family home and that her brothers, Michael and Ned, took the baby and threw the baby into the sea. And her family are like, yep, that's a thing that definitely happened. But here's the thing, a couple of things, apart from the fact that Cahersiveen and Abbey Dunley are like an hour and 10 minutes, like by car away from each other. Like, that's a long journey. Like, somebody would have noticed that, you know? And also the small fact that the Kerry baby was not in the sea. Like, the infant was not wet. It was placed there. Like, there was a bag nearby that was like a fertilizer bag. And so they're like, oh, it's from a farm. It's clearly yours. Like, that's very poor police work, lads. Very poor. But yes, the whole family are agreeing with this story, but they're all saying different things. Like, each member of the family has like a different like story, and none of it is fucking aligning. Like, none of the stories have Joanne giving birth in the field. Like, some say that she was with her Auntie Bridie, some say she was alone in her bedroom. One family member said the baby was born alive, another said it was stillborn. Some confessions had Joanne beat the baby to death with a toilet brush. Others that she strangled the infant with her bare hands. Oh my God. In one option, like, the brothers, you know, drove away. In another, like, the sister Kathleen was there. And then in one account, Aunt Bridie was there. Like, there's just all these different stories, and like none of the confessions are matching, like none of them. But the Gardaí are like, sure, that'll do. Like, even though nothing makes sense. Now, critically, and I do want to say critically, in the confession that Joanne signs, she states that she stabbed baby John in the back. Now, as we know, this is not correct. Like, this was false information. Maybe it was misinformation, maybe it was disinformation. Either way, it was incorrect. And so that itself should have just discredited the whole thing. But, you know, they wanted to put the blame on Joanne. And here's the thing as well, like, initially she's telling the Gardaí, like, the baby's on the farm, you can find him, and they go and look. And by look, I mean, they probably stood there, put their hands on their hips and kind of looked from the left and the right and went, now lads, no baby here. And then went straight to try and force a confession out of her. Now, Joanne ends up being sent to Limerick prison to await trial, right? Meanwhile, even though she is dealing with this absolute shit show, Joanne still has the wherewithal to tell her sister Kathleen where the baby was. You know, the stillborn boy who she would have named Shane if he lived. So she's like, this is where baby Shane is. And so Kathleen goes out, she finds the little pool on the farm, and she finds the body of baby Shane. And so there you have it. This is not the Cahersiveen baby. It's not baby John, because here is this infant. There he is. But of course the Gardaí want more proof, and so they have this infant corpse, they have the blood tested. And the baby has type O blood, which is the exact same blood type as both Joanne Hayes and Jeremiah Locke. Baby John, the Cahersiveen baby, had type A blood, and so the Kerry baby could not be Jeremiah and Joanne's son. And because the murder squad are absolutely grasping at straws at this point, they come up with the theory of the very, very, very incredibly super rare phenomenon, of which I'm only going to say once because it's very, very complicated and difficult to pronounce: heteropaternal superfecundation. Did I say it right? I don't even know. I don't even care. Heteropaternal superfecundation. And what that is when two eggs are released from a womb within several days of each other, and they are impregnated by different sperm, right? By like one dude than another dude. And so the Gardaí's theory is that she was impregnated by Jeremiah, and then like within a couple days, she had sex with another man who had type A blood and also got pregnant then, which is, that is a haystack of grasping at straws. Instead of maybe assuming that the simplest solution is probably correct, like, hey, maybe it's someone else's infant with a different blood type. They're like, no, she clearly shagged two men in quick succession in this very rare, convenient thing that happens for us in this case. And so the Garda Síochána are patting themselves in the back and they want to get this through as quickly as possible. So when this is handed to the Director of Public Prosecutions, so that, Joanne can be prosecuted, they look at this and go, what the actual fuck? Like, this can't go to court. Like, there are so many holes in your story. It's practically a fishing net. They looked at the confessions, they looked at the DNA evidence, and they're just like, lads, like, withdraw these charges immediately, like, stop it, by done, right? And because the Director of Public Prosecutions was like, stop this shit, the Gardaí had to just do what they said. And then on the 10th of October 1984, all charges against Joanne Hayes and her family were dropped. And then an inquiry was started to kind of go like, how the shit did this get this far? Like, how did this happen? And so the inquiry, surprisingly, went absolutely nowhere. Because they hold this tribunal, right, with Justice Kevin Lynch, who is just the absolute worst. The whole point of this tribunal, I want to make very clear, the whole point of it was to investigate the Gardaí and their practices. It was there to ensure that justice was followed, that the arm of the law was followed, and that they were doing things by the by. It was to see whether they were threatening the family, if they had conducted a poor investigation. But they didn't treat it like that. They treated it like it was a trial of Joanne. Like Justice Kevin Lynch, he kept referring to Joanne Hayes as the wrongdoer, which is like, you can't do that because one, this isn't about her. This is about the Gardaí. And instead of doing that, like, she ends up being put on the stand for 5 days, which is like the longest anyone had ever been on the stand before. And they were questioning her and re-questioning her and asking her about her sex life and the babies and everything else that happened. And they were really treating her like she was on trial, when the whole purpose of this was to check to make sure the Gardaí were doing their fucking jobs. And also, weird side note, Kevin Lynch, Justice Kevin Lynch, the judge, he carried about the umbilical cord of baby Shane. Like, he carried that with him, and it was then shown at this tribunal, like, because he didn't believe that she could, like, rip it with her own hands. He didn't think that was a thing that could be done. Like, him and the other, like, 14 dudes that were involved in this, like, none of them had even, like, seen a birth happen. So they did not believe that she could give birth standing up. Now, I don't know if you know this, but you can basically give birth in any position, like bent over, on your back, on your stomach, like depending on how you need to do it. Like, loads of people do it like on their knees or standing up. Like, there are so many options for giving birth. Like, it's not just one way. Like, so many options, right? Just as long as the legs are open and there's like a direct route, you're good most of the time. Like, even during this tribunal, they keep saying that Joanne got herself pregnant. Like, no, there was another person involved, Jeremiah Locke. And like, when he is brought forth and questioned, they're like, we're gonna be like sensitive, we don't want to harm your reputation, as if he isn't the man cheating on his wife, as if he isn't like a major component, the primary component in this scenario. Like, he is the reason these women are pregnant. Like, he again could just bloody use a condom, but no, he just wants to ruin women's lives. But yeah, he's getting questioned and they're like, we don't want to damage your reputation, we know this is difficult for you. Whereas they've got Joanne and they're questioning her about the size of her uterus and her miscarriages and everything that goes along with that, previous lovers. Like, they question Jeremiah, asking if he was like the first, as if that would matter. Like, and they're just trying to be so considerate to him, while they're quite happy for Joanne to have an absolute breakdown on the stand, and instead of giving her a fucking break, they sedate her, as if that's better. The entire thing was there to just attack her and her character. And for the record, at the end of this tribunal, like, they don't mention anything about how the guards conducted the investigation. Like, they don't hone in on that. They don't bring forth any of that. It's such bullshit. And the treatment of Joanna does not go unnoticed, because during this tribunal, women from all over Ireland show up outside to protest. They're outside to protest this, and they're writing letters. Like, they're writing letters to, like, the wives of the Gardaí, being like, what the hell are you doing? You should be ashamed of yourselves. Like, it's a whole situation. And Joanna's getting these letters, and these people are showing up, and she doesn't get it. Like it is part of this feminist movement, but she doesn't feel like it's part of that. She doesn't understand why they're there. She doesn't realise, I think at the time, how symbolic like she is, because she is the fallen woman. Like, that's where all of the prejudice is being thrown at. She's an example of what happens to people in the society with this prejudice, when she was just a woman who suffered a miscarriage, and she was accused of a violent murder because of that. And because people are protesting it, well, women are protesting it, like Justice Kevin Lynch, she's like, I don't get why women of Ireland care about this. It's like, of course you don't, because you're an idiot. And to the end of this, Kevin's just pushing the narrative that Joanne's a liar, and the Gardaí, at worst, we're guilty of elevated wishful thinking to the status of hard fact. Like, what? Like, how can you look at this evidence and not see what's happening? And the Kerry Babies scandal, like, this is a point where a few things start to turn in Ireland. It's a slow burn, but things start turning at this point. But for Joanne, like, she loses her job, her reputation is just buggered, and it's 30 years before she gets an apology from the Gardaí. Like, the Garda Commissioner issues an apology in 2015, and the investigation and the inquest are called, and I quote, grossly negligent. Now, it's going to be another 5 years before Joanne and her family get an apology from the country, right? And in 2019, they are getting ready to take the Garda Commissioner and the Director of Public Prosecution to, like, the High Court. And after a few months, Joanne Hayes is awarded 1.5 million euros. Like, her siblings, like Ned, Michael and Kathleen, they get 300,000 each as compensation. Yvonne, who was her daughter, was the baby that lived. She got like 100 grand, and the court basically announces that, you know, everybody was wrong. They treated them like shit, and they deserve like a full apology. And to top it all off, that the attack on Joanne and her families was unconstitutional. And even though she got money and she gets this all in the end, like, she didn't really get justice because of the trauma she went through, and I don't think she ever will. And it's such a fucking travesty, and it makes me so mad, because eventually they do DNA testing, right, on baby John. He's exhumed, they do the testing, and it proves unequivocally, undoubtedly, that Joanne Hayes is not the mother of baby John. And it was like earlier this year, they actually brought in 2 people for questioning, a man and a woman. So they found the biological parents of the Cahersiveen baby. Now they bring them in, they are questioned, and they question them in relation to a man who's been like dead 5 years. And they're questioning about this specific person, and then they let them go. Now, there's no statute of limitations for murder in Ireland. Like, you don't just get away with it one day, which means they either don't have enough evidence for a court of law, or they don't believe that these 2 were actually involved in that. And considering everything else that was going on in the country at the time, there are so many things that could have happened to the Cahersiveen baby, to baby John. And we may never know the truth. And there are hundreds, probably hitting 1,000, 2,000 even at this point. If you go through the history, if you find what's been hidden of children who suffered, or women who suffered, just because of the way the country treated them and the way that society thought they deserved to be treated, all while men got a pat on the back and got away with it as if they weren't involved, as if they aren't the perpetrators most of the time. And on that harrowing note, I think it's time to end this. So because this has been generally dark and depressing, I want to give you something light for recommendations. For listening, you know what, go listen to the Benga Boys. It's ridiculous. Just the fast food rockers. Something silly. You know, you deserve it. Just go and sing along to an anthem of your youth. Just let it out. For watching, just go watch an episode of Bluey. An episode of Bluey, doesn't matter what age you are, it'll resonate with you in some way. Just go watch Bluey. That's what you need. And for reading, go read The Devil in Amber by Mark Gaddis. It is weird, it is silly, and it's very British humour, but it's something. And with that, I'm going to bid you good night. Adios, au revoir, auf Wiedersehen, my friends. Bye-bye.